I love it when I have a podcast that actually speaks very true to the theme of this podcast, which is, it's the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast, dispelling the myths of health, fitness, and wellness. And today I've come upon a great one. I happened to be talking to somebody the other day and came up with a comment that they made on a Facebook post that I did where I was doing an activity that was not related to a race I was training for. They asked me, why did I do that? And I mentioned a word that we use quite often. In fact, when I said it, the person just, well, of course. And I started thinking, I actually looked at him and asked, do you know what that means? Really, do you know what that means? And though it's a common word, like a lot of things that we throw around, metabolism and aerobic and anaerobic and whatever, do we know what it means when you're actually using another activity or sport to get you ready for your sport? In other words, what is cross-training? Today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast.
Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Good day and welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. My name is Garrett Williamson. I'm president of Personal Edge Fitness. Thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate you listening in, and I'm going to get to how you contact the show in just a minute, but I feel like I need to explain my appearance here just a bit. And it's rather timely that I'm doing this podcast now because of why I'm dressed this way and the time that I'm actually recording this and all that kind of good stuff. The reason I'm dressed this way, and if you actually, I must be part Italian because I swear I am, because I tend to talk with my hands. And you may see that I've actually got numbers written on the back of my hand. I actually have them on my biceps too here. That's because I just finished a race that I did. It's a training race that I'm using. I'm getting ready for a World Championships in Abu Dhabi, the ITU International Triathlon Union World Championships in aquabike, which I qualified for a year ago. It's coming up in the end of November, and I was actually doing a training race for that, which happened to be an open water swim. I just finished that this morning. The training race went really well. In a training race, a lot of times what you're doing is you're working on a few different techniques or a few different qualities of your racing, trying to hone it a little bit. And I'm glad to say that I was successful with that. It was a 2-mile open water swim. It was fantastic. The folks over in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi put it on. They did a great job. But I'm actually coming straight from that, which is why I'm a bit casual in my Personal Edge Fitness workout t-shirt. So thank you, love, for allowing me to do so, because I really wanted to share this podcast today about cross-training. What it is, why do we do it, what does it mean when we say cross-train? Now, I'm going to get into that, but I'm going to tell you, as always, how to get in touch with the show if you have any questions, and letting you know that the podcast that I'm going to be doing on creatine and creatinine levels is coming up. I have a couple of guests that I'm going to have on the show. We're trying to arrange schedules, so that is coming. But if you're interested in any more information about this podcast or any others, or if, like our friend Gene said, if you have an idea for a podcast, please give me a call and let me know at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach out to me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. That's, of course, my email address, and personaledgefitness.com is our website. You can contact us that way. Reach out to us on social media at either Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook or at Team PE on Twitter. Thank you again for joining us. Now, it was interesting. I posted a picture the other day. Erica posted it. It was a picture that I took of me training out on the University of South Alabama track, getting ready for the ITU Aquabike World Championships. Now, many of you know that I'm a multisport athlete. I've done both sprint triathlon, super sprint triathlon. I shouldn't say both. There's 4 different activities. Sprint triathlon, super sprint triathlon, aquathlon, and aquabike. Now, all those are different variations of running and swimming and biking. Aquabike happens to be a race that you take the run out of it. The standard distance is a 1,500-meter swim followed with a 23 to 24-mile bike. I qualified in New York last year to make Team USA, and I'll be representing Team USA at the ITU International Triathlon Union World Championships in Abu Dhabi, UAE, this coming November. I'm looking forward to it. But the reason that I came up with this idea for this podcast, and that came from a conversation somebody remarked, I was training for the ITU Aquabike World Championships. And he said, well, wait a second, you told me, Garrett, that aquabike is actually swimming and biking. I said, yeah, exactly. So what were you doing running? And that's when I responded to him. I said, well, I'm just doing some cross-training. And he said, oh, yeah, okay, oh, yeah, great, wonderful. And then a little while later in our workout, I looked at him and I said, let me ask you something. Do you really know what cross-training is? Oh, yeah, that's when you use another sport and you work on it and it makes you better. Well, that's true, but how? And I realized that, that's another one of those common words that are thrown around when we talk about fitness. And many times those words get peppered with a lot of myths. I've covered a lot of those on the different shows. I'm not going to recap all those. But that's why I thought it was a good idea to do a deep dive into what actual cross-training is. What is it? And what does it actually do? Why would you cross-train? So cross-training, to put it simple, I always like to start with a nice definition. It's the action of practice, and I am reading this. It's a very simple one, but it's one I pulled off, and I actually put together from a few different places that I trust. And this one made the most sense. The action of practice of two or more sports or types of exercise in order to improve fitness or performance in one sport. And that's pretty well what everybody understands. If I actually take a day off and instead of cycling or swimming all the time, I actually added another different activity, something completely different, that's going to improve my sport. Now, cross-training has been around so long that people accept that as normal, and it is true. Many times we accept things as normal, and they're not true. This time, they accept that it's okay. You're doing something else, and it's making you better at your sport. But I really wanted to tell you how, because there's times when you can be just over-exercising, doing other activities, thinking that you're cross-training. And you may be cross-training, but you could be overtraining. Or you could be cross-training in a far more efficient or effective way. So let's get into it. What does it actually do? First thing, the reason we would cross-train is, let's say for my cycling and for my swimming, for this particular race that I have coming up, the ITU Aquabike Worlds. Obviously, my swimming needs to be very good. So it's a 1,500-meter swim. I've got to have a good average speed on my bike. So I better be putting some laps in the pool, some laps out here in the open water, doing races like I did today, which is an open water race. And I better be on the bike. I better be logging in a good 100 miles a week. I better be getting some group rides that are going to make me faster because I'm riding with people that are faster. That's pretty understandable. Of course, a runner, to get better at running, is going to run. And you see where I'm going with that. But I think it's pretty obvious to see that a couple of things. For the most obvious is the fact that though I can cycle and swim, it is now understood. For many years it wasn't. For early years of my career it wasn't understood that strength training adds to any sport. I can make an argument for strength training and call me up and I'll tell you exactly. There's a strong one for it. For strength training for the largest participant sport in the world, which happens to be billiards. So strength training is going to aid in everything. For many years, especially golfers, I had a problem getting golfers to strength training. Oh, well, I'm going to get muscle bound. I've gone over that myth before, but I'm going to get muscle bound. I'm going to get to where I can't hit a shot because my muscles are so big and all that ridiculous, idiotic theory. We've pretty well beat that to death. I had a lot of pros that have helped me with that, in that, actually strength training is really good. We know a lot about it. So strength training for cycling, strength training for swimming, good lat work, good shoulder work, obvious. That's going to be obvious to anybody. But that is a form of cross-training. And one of the reasons why you cross-train is to build the primary muscles that you're moving, and you want to work on the secondary muscles. Now, here's what I mean by that. I'm going to take a very obvious one that a lot of people hear, and I use this a lot. In fact, I did an entire podcast on nothing but hamstrings. It's one of my favorite muscles to work. It is I call this, Garrett's opinion, I call this the largest, most neglected muscle in the body, which is the hamstring. And you think about it, I've used this example copious numbers of times. I'm sure that I will use it many, many more. And that is, I use it in my talk when I talk about the live age. This guy, he was fantastic. He was in the Olympics. He was running for Team USA, and he was going to win the 100 meters, but he pulled you just said it in your head. I know you did. Hamstring. Largest, most neglected muscle in the body. Obvious to me, obvious to a trainer, and hopefully obvious to you. Evidently, if this person's doing a lot of running, obviously something's missing as far as hamstring training. And the reason we pull a muscle, the largest reason why we pull a muscle is an imbalance. Every muscle has an opposing muscle. So the opposing muscle of the hamstring happens to be the quadriceps. And quadriceps get a lot of work. They get a lot of work walking. They get a lot of work running. Now, don't get me wrong. As I've said many times, running is not strength training for your legs. But what's not getting trained, and we know this for a fact, the hamstring is definitely not trained during running, and we know that's largely neglected. So you want to be a more efficient runner, better runner. Not only are you going to work your quadriceps, but you're also going to work those hamstrings. This is also where hip work comes into play. Now, that's something I use a lot for swimmers, believe it or not. Their inner thighs don't get a whole lot of work in swimming in the pool. And when you're looking at doing 200s, 500s, and the mile swims, what have you, even for my younger athletes, I have quite a few swimmers, but their inner thighs get tired. And you want to hold those legs tight together. You want to pretty well almost lock the knee, point the toe, and you're going to use your hip flexor, which is the muscle that if you've ever done sit-up and you've had somebody hold your feet because your feet will quote-unquote come up, well, actually what's happening there is your hip flexor is being involved in pulling your upper body up. It's part of the muscle. It's the muscle just below the abdominals that also gets involved in that action. And when you actually hold your feet down, you can push with your hip flexor. You're pushing your toes against that person's hand and actually helping you lift yourself up. It happens to be the muscle that controls your knee driving straight up, like if you're going to do high knees or something. Well, in a kick for swimming, that hip flexor is extremely important. If your knee is straight, legs are straight, which they should be, you lose major inefficiency in a freestyle movement if you're bending your knees. You're actually kicking from your hip. So that muscle is very important. You're also keeping those legs locked together. I'm actually doing this, if you're watching on social media, I'm doing this with my fingers. I have my fingers close together. I'm turning them and pointing them at the camera. They're actually spread apart like in a peace sign. If my legs are like this, it's going to be far more inefficient. You're going to create a lot more drag. So you want to keep those legs locked together. Now, if you're in a 25 or 50-yard race, you're probably not going to feel it very much. But once you get the energy burn, the energy decline that you see in a 500, 1,000, or 1,600, everything's going to get tired. And if you're not training those inner thigh muscles, you're going to have your legs going to start to come apart. You're going to start losing some efficiency in your stroke. And that's just one of the many things that we work on through cross training with strength training on different sports. In cycling, it happens to be hips. So many cyclists have problems with hips. So many runners have problems with hips. So many humans have problems with hips. Doing adductor, abductor work. Adductor is when you're actually doing an inner thigh work. Abductor, A-B-D-U-C-T-O-R. Abductor is when you're actually pushing your legs out, that sideways movement, that medial glute. There's a lot of involvement. I'm sorry about the bounce in here. I have this on a board here, and it's kind of probably driving my producer nuts. The abductor, that hip muscle, you have a lot of engagement in running, cycling, pretty much any sport, and especially any sport that you move sideways. Soccer, baseball for that matter, football, tennis. So using cross-training via strength training, pretty obvious. You're going to enhance the sport by working on those muscles. Besides, typically go straight to the auxiliary muscles that we typically miss in sport. But I always work lats, the back muscles, and the chest muscles for that matter for swimmers. Huge, important muscle. If you look at a swimmer, if you were to draw a swimmer, you draw that upside down V, that wide back, because they have incredibly strong lats, because that's what's pulling their arm through, whether it's breaststroke or backstroke, or even, breaststroke or freestyle or butterfly, and even backstroke. So those major movers, we're working those too. I'm kind of beating that to death because we can see where strength training is very important for that. But let's get to the things that you may or may not realize about cross-training and what it actually benefits. It helps you in training anaerobically while decreasing load. I'll tell you what I mean. You can't overtrain. It's very easy to overtrain. Keep that in mind when I'm talking about this next subject, because it's funny, when I was talking last week about the motor cortex and the cerebellum, when I was talking about getting the brain to learn different patterns, different movements, to take time off, and your brain would start running those patterns, those sequences in your mind a lot faster, so you'll actually pick up on that skill. And you need time off. And I use the example also in the fact that I've seen a lot of coaches do this. I've seen a lot of parents do this, where they'll have an athlete, a student, a child of theirs, continue to do an exercise, just run them into the ground. And there's an old train of thought. It actually caused a lot of damage, not only in kids, but it caused a lot of damage in seniors. I see this a lot. When in doubt, work. Now, I like a good work ethic, but when in doubt, work is not the best work ethic. Run into several instances and had to get people to back off of training because their answer was, if they weren't getting the results they saw, the only answer is to work more. So you want to take time off, even if you're doing like I'm doing. I'm training for this big event, and I'm doing many days. I'm doing 2 a day, most days of the week. But I've got to recover. I've got to recover. I've got to have a day off. I have a day off during the week to recover. We do that with all of our athletes. But also, I can do what we call active recovery. In other words, I can use running. If I'm training for cycling and swimming, a race that involves cycling and swimming, I can use running to decrease the load on the different muscles that I use in cycling and swimming, but still build my anaerobic, that's Anaerobic, remember, means without oxygen. That capacity and that ability of your body to sprint, recover, sprint, recover, sprint, recover. That's our anaerobic capacity. And at the same time, build my aerobic capacity. That's with oxygen. That's what we usually refer to as endurance, where you can go and go and go and go at about 75% of your heart rate, but you can breathe just fine, keep your heart rate low. You can build those things through cross-training and still allow what we call active recovery on the muscles for like the back muscles, shoulder muscles, chest muscles, what have you that I do in swimming, and even some of the leg muscles that when I'm using in cycling, because I'm not using them in the same way. It's a way of maintaining your training but allowing your muscles to recover. Still need that day off, don't get me wrong. That active recovery is another reason to cross-train. At the same time, there's another part of this, and that has to do with specialization. There's actually a few things. Specialization is one of them. When I'm running, as opposed to when I'm cycling, I'm going to be doing sprint work, and I'm going to fire from muscles that I would usually get when I'm standing up on the bike and what have you, but I'm going to fire them in a little different way. And so it gets me ready to kick it up a gear and get going in the straightaway. I'm sorry, I'm doing it outside. I'm doing the podcast outside today that you hear. If you're not watching on social media, you hear boats going by there. It's a beautiful day outside. I know it's September, but it's still summer out here, so pardon the noise there. But anyway, strengthening those specific muscles in a little different way. Think about cutting a piece of wood, and you're cutting in the same direction, kind of at an angle with an axe. And if you want it to go quicker, you change the angle and hit it from the other side, either from the back side or hit it from, if you're cutting on the right side, you start cutting from the left side. You'll actually cut the board faster. Well, that's sort of what you're doing, that same kind of idea. You're speeding up your development of that muscle by, for lack of a better explanation, hitting it a different way. It's a more well-rounded development. You have far more potential of decreasing injury by making sure you have that well-rounded training. Going back to the hamstrings with runners. That's another benefit in the specialization of the muscles and what have you to using another sport to train for your sport. The other thing I'm looking at my notes because there's one I want to jump to. I always want to jump to, but I want to make sure I cover all my others. And of course, I'm pointing in my head. I want to go to the mental side of this because this is rather fascinating. The specialization also worked on activating secondary movers. I think I'm beating that to death. I said that a minute ago. Your primary mover is going to get a lot of work. Every cyclist feels like they need tree trunks for legs. I understand that. Got to have big quads. Most football players feel the same way. Definitely linemen do. They're going to be doing squats. They're going to be blasting off that line. They want to make sure they've got big glutes and they want to make sure they have big quads. But they may not work the medial glute as much. They may not work on that lateral movement. They may not work on that inner thigh like I was saying earlier. They may not work that hip flexor. They may not use their calves, work their calves and train their calves a lot. So using different type of cross-training, you can work those things. Cross-training for calf development, jump and rope. It's fantastic. All right, want to share for those that are listening in, that is actually an ultralight going by. Usually, if the gentleman sees us out here, he gives us a wave. So pardon the noise. Sorry about that. Definitely don't want to stop that activity. You can tell that gentleman is definitely living his level of wellness. But anyway, those secondary muscles get missed quite a bit, and they're also the ones that you can injure so simply, and it will sideline you. We hear about that with professional athletes all the time. They get sidelined by a simple, stupid injury, it seems like. But it's a secondary mover that's not being worked. For examples of working those secondary movers is in cycling, I actually use swimming. Now, I'm training for a swim bike race, and that kind of works out well. But for cycling, I use swimming. Why? Because I want to keep my back strength. I want to keep my back strength up. I use a lot of resistance training for lower back, but when you're swimming and you're holding yourself in that flat position, you're actually working your lower back. It's fantastic when you're bent over on the bike and you're on it for a good hour and you're in TT bars and your elbows are down, you're leaning over in that hunchback position. It's fantastic work on lower back to do swimming. Now, the point that I want to get to, though, and I'll sum up with about cross-training is something extremely important, is, of course, the mental part of it. The mental part of it. But one of the most obvious things is something I saw a lot with runners when I was growing up. Now I've seen it with every sport. I mean, I saw a ton of gymnasts that I work with. I saw this, and that was they were doing gymnastics every single day. Runners that were phenomenal runners in the 8th grade that were burned out by the time they got to be a senior year. And that's what we're talking about, burnout. The same thing over and over and over and over again. I couldn't believe it. There was a gymnast that I worked with. She was national champion with the Georgia gymnastics team, and we worked in a gym together in Commerce, Georgia, and we were talking about doing tumbling, which I love doing. I loved hitting the floor and throwing all kinds of neat tricks, and she could way outdo me. She would come out of the floor and set a chair out there. She had no desire to ever tumble again, at that time at least. Didn't make any sense to me. Well, Lord, she'd been doing it since she was 4 years old. She'd been training for some days 7-8 hours a day. So yeah, she was completely sick of it. And changing gears, having your day that you look forward to, that you're going to go running. I actually look forward to my running right now. When I start training for the aquathlon, which is a run, swim, run event in April, I may change my mind and be looking forward to getting back on my bike. But when you're doing that same thing over and over again, you want to still train. You feel like you're going to fall behind if you don't, but your brain wants something different. And you start looking forward to those days when you can go and do your cross training. The other side of it happens to be with motor cortex and cerebellum development. Now, if you heard my podcast last week, you found out how important the motor cortex is. We talk a lot about cerebellum when I talk about balance, but developing that motor cortex is extremely important. And without getting into, there's done studies on this. It's fascinating. And I could bore you to tears with it. I don't want to do that. But it's a very simple thing to understand. Again, go back to that chopping wood, changing direction, working a muscle a different way. Your brain's the same way. It's almost like saying, okay, you're working on multiplication, you can't quite get it, then you switch over to division. Come at it a different way. And that's what's happening with your brain when you're working on dexterity and agility and balance and efficiency of movement. That's all controlled. They're initiated by the motor cortex, and it's controlled by the cerebellum. Well, doing cross training, working that muscle in a different way, is going to train that motor cortex a different way. It's going to train that cerebellum a different way. And you're going to develop those neural pathways far faster. I hope I haven't bored you to tears, but I want to go over the simple concept of cross training and actually what is it. You can cross train for any sport, and I guarantee you, done the right way, it is going to be effective. You're going to be a far more efficient athlete. You're going to be a far more efficient whatever you're working on. Is going to come a lot faster. If you need help putting that together, please contact us, and we'd love to help you lay out a plan, lay out a protocol for cross training for your particular activity. You can reach us at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com, which of course is our website and our Facebook page. If you prefer, hit me up on Twitter at Team PE. However you want to contact us, however we can help you develop your own type of cross training for whatever activity you're working on. It's just one more way we help you reach your level of wellness. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.